this is such a self-evident topic in certain ways, and so fundamental to my own spiritual life. But I find myself strangely unable to think even of how to begin. And I guess it's actually because it's not something that can even be explained. It just has to be understood somehow from the inside out. Do you need a guru? Swamiji's answer was always, if somebody asked him that question, especially if the questioner wanted the answer to be no, Swami's answer was always not if you don't think so. Now, that's balanced against this, what we often talk about, this long-standing, inherent tradition from India of the absolute essential necessity to have a guru if you would ever achieve divine enlightenment. There's a story told about some very great saint in India who used to have visions of Krishna all the time. And when that devotee asked Krishna to give him liberation, he said, well, I can't do that. Only a guru can do that. And then he sent him off somewhere to find his guru in a most unlikely place. There's a whole long story about that, but that's not the point. But the point was, as the story is told, that even Krishna says, no, there has to be this intermediary who actually is the instrument for dissolving your karma and allowing you to rise free. I myself haven't the slightest idea what that really means. It doesn't really, on any logical level, make any sense. If the whole point is to get to know Krishna and you're already there having visions of him, why can't he just skip the whole system? But the way the scriptures are all written, and it's certainly not my place to challenge them. I can say that I don't really understand it, but I'm certainly not going to challenge it. And then there is this other long tradition about the singularity of the guru-disciple relationship and how that is determined from very ancient times, and we move through until we eventually find the master that we belong to, and then only through that master will our freedom come. And there's stories told in Yogananda's life about certain disciples, a few in particular, one in particular, who betrayed Master in a most egregious manner, just argued with him and turned against him and then spoke against him and actually sued him in court and tried to take a lot of his money and succeeded in doing so. And terrible. But Master said still, and that he's my own disciple. Master didn't use those words, but he made that clear. And for years, after the man had moved to another part of America, every year Master would send him a crate of mangoes. And every year the man would return it. And Master said, he will never find God except through this instrument. And then he even went further to say is that he'll suffer for 3 more lifetimes, but then he'll resolve it and then he'll become liberated. 3 lifetimes in the great scheme of things is not a really big deal. So a few cartons of mangoes sent back, you don't exactly know how to, I don't know how to put the whole thing together, where that tie is indissoluble at a certain point. It becomes indissoluble. But I remember also in the context of Ananda, a lot of people would come and go. And they would have a great sense of this is my path. And often Swami used the phrase, which I gradually came to understand, straw fire. If you make a fire out of straw, it burns very hot and very fast, but then it burns out. There's no staying power in the straw. It makes a big flame, and then it's just gone. And so over many years I would have seen, 40, 50 years almost of this, I've been watching people come and go. People come with a great deal of enthusiasm, and they're not being even slightly insincere, and I have to say this in the right way. I'm not really casting aspersions on someone, because Swamiji said to us once, a group of ministers who were just beginning to work in as being instruments to help people come forward spiritually, And our percentages were not good. There was a lot of migration through our little centers, people coming in and coming out, and it was hard not to take it personally. And Swamiji said to us, you have to understand that the karma to seek God for a whole lifetime is very, very, very good karma. And not everyone has it. And we develop it slowly. We have an incarnation where we're excited for a while, and then we become distracted by some other shiny bauble, and off we go. And so I said, you can't take it personally. People just have as much spiritual karma as they have, and when they've burned it up, it's just gone. Any one of us who've either come and gone from Ananda, come, gone, and come again, because if you're sitting in this room, that's the cycle you're following, or had any passionate interest in your life, you realize it's not that you're being insincere, it's just that at a certain point the karma is over. And there's nothing really you can do, and you don't even notice that the karma is gone. It's just gone. And then maybe a long time later you wake up and find yourself doing something, you wonder what happened. You find the debris of your previous passion sort of somewhere in a box in the closet, and you think, oh yeah, I really used to be into watercoloring, gardening, Yogananda, whatever it might be. And you sort of don't know where it is anymore. So through the years of Ananda, people would come with this passionate commitment, but then it wouldn't stay. And I said to Swamiji once, how does this fit? Where does this really fit in? And that was when he also said, people have just so much karma, they're figuring it out. And so it's a multi-dimensioned reality. Now, there's one more part of it that Swami often talked about. He talked about it more in the context of the present day practice of churchianity, which is distinct from Christianity, where the most important thing is for me to accept Jesus Christ in my heart, and then I'm saved. And Swami said somewhat wryly, he says, well, of course, Jesus also has to accept him, because once the master makes that commitment, our commitment to the master, of course, is part of it, but once the master makes the commitment to us, there was Yogananda with this disciple who literally did his very best and very nearly succeeded in destroying master's work, literally left him penniless for a period of time, just wiped out a decade of effort on master's part, destroyed his reputation. Of course, the nice thing about yellow journalism is that it yellows and then it just goes away. But master was excoriated in the newspapers and terrible things happened, this disciple. But master couldn't get rid of him, really. Master couldn't even allow his behavior to affect master's commitment to him. Master jokingly spoke about a certain disciple who Swamiji said had commotion karma, was the word he used. Commotion karma is a marvelous phrase. There are people periodically who pass through our world who have it. It's just no matter what they do, something always goes wrong. This man, he was James Collar. Swami talked about this particular story when they were just building Lake Shrine in Los Angeles, and there were ducks coming and eating the fish. And Master got a BB gun, and so when the ducks were there one day, he fired the gun over their head and it scared them away. It was a way of not hurting them but getting rid of them because he didn't want the fish to be eaten. So this man, imitating Master, picked up the gun, fired it randomly, and killed 2 ducks. Was seen by a neighbor. The neighbor called the police. The police came. He was indicted for killing wildlife. And it just went on and on. This was just sort of his... He wasn't even shooting at the ducks. He just randomly shot the gun and killed ducks because he had commotion karma. Master described him as a mouthful of hot molasses. He said, too hot to swallow, too sticky to spit out. And he was humorously, it was a sacred obligation he had, but nonetheless, he was not above seeing the humorous side of it. This man is impossibly difficult, but nor can I get rid of him because I'm responsible for him. And even when the action was far more egregious, Master was responsible for him. So it's not merely that we can just lightheartedly and randomly say, oh yes, I think I'll be a disciple of this master. We also have to connect ourselves profoundly enough, and this was the sermon, the discussion from last week's reading, when Jesus was in the crowd and somebody touched him. It was the woman who touched the hem of his garment and was immediately healed of a 12-year hemorrhage. And Jesus being surrounded by all these people, but he felt her touch. I mean, all these people were touching him, but he felt her touch because she had called upon him in a way that completely separated her from the crowd. Now, it's comforting for us to think, that Master is committed to us. And it's helpful to believe that Master is committed to us. But we must never imagine merely because we have declared it, in just the same way that any relationship that you have with anyone, you can't just assume merely you have to. You're my mother, you're my father, you have to treat me a certain way. You're my child, you owe it to me to behave this way. I'm your boss, I invested your money, whatever it might be. This is where Master talked about the only relationship in the world that is free from compulsion is friend to friend. And in our relationship with Master, and this is a very subtle part of it, the relationship has to be reciprocal. It isn't just, I'm your disciple and you take care of me. It has to be reciprocal, and it has to be reciprocal in the ways that really reach the Master. This is where service comes. I remember in my early years when I was at Ananda, the very first few years, I had a very, I still do, very sort of single-minded determination. And my connection to the spiritual path was so specifically through Swami Kriyananda. I came to live at Ananda Village. I was very happy to be in community. I loved being in the country. The whole thing was a tremendous lark to me. I loved all parts of it. Swami put me right away in the kitchen, and for a couple of years I made food, and we just had, everything about it was totally fun. All the hardships, everything. We had such primitive conditions. Speaking of the kitchen, I remember this one day. It was a dome. It was a white-colored dome like this. It was such a piece of cheese in 1971, and it stood for about 20 more years, and they continued to use it. It was just very, very primitive. And one winter day, I came at like 5 in the morning to cook breakfast, and I walked up, and it was snowing, and it was very cold, and I looked at the white dome and had snow on it and had this extraordinarily beautiful pattern of icicles going from the edge of the platform all the way to the ground. And I thought to myself, why have I never seen that before? And I just spent a long time admiring it. It was so beautiful. And then I went in and I realized that the pipes had burst and hundreds of gallons of water had flown out of the water tower into the kitchen, completely flooded the floor, leaked out under the dome, and run down. And that's why it was all such beautiful icicles. And ice on the floor and water everywhere. Marvelous. So I had to figure out, because there was no water, of course. There was no water in the water tower. There was just no water because it was all in those beautiful icicles. So it occurred to me that the hot water heater in the bathhouse still had water in it. So I made breakfast by walking in the snow, over, filling the bucket, carrying it back, and I don't even remember even hesitating. All I could think of was how beautiful those icicles were and how too bad it was that such a beautiful pattern was created. Just what difference did it make? We had this old truck. It was called St. Luke. I think that was just an affirmation because it was hardly saintly. It did not have four-wheel drive. This was so many years ago. Four-wheel drive hardly existed. And the road was so rutted the last mile and a half. And every Thursday, which was theoretically a fast day, meaning that we didn't cook. It just meant everybody snuck into the kitchen and got food. But it was theoretically a fast day. I would have to go into town and load up the truck with supplies for the week and do everyone's laundry, because we didn't have a laundromat anywhere. So I'd take 20 bags of laundry and then load up the truck and then try to come back. But in the winter, in the rain, in the snow, and I'm not a big person, but I got pretty good at this thing. We could only usually get about halfway up that last mile, and we just shoot the road is what we would call it, just like trying to shoot the hill like this, and you just go as fast as you could and just keep swinging the wheel back and forth as you would skid like this until inevitably you went into a ditch. It took me a while to figure out that nothing really bad could happen to you, just whoop, flop over into the dip. So we'd flop in the ditch, and then everyone would get out, and then we'd just carry everything up. I don't ever remember even thinking that it was hard. It was just a game. How far could we get? Why? Because we were there doing something so much fun for Master. Just like here we are, we're at the beginning, we're at this wild adventure. Master wants world brotherhood colonies, just like the very idea that we would ever succeed on the level that we succeeded, it would have been ludicrous. It just didn't make any difference. And it's very interesting to me because I had no responsibility. Well, I never thought of myself as having responsibility. I was a child, Swami was in charge, and there was just such enormous freedom. And I asked myself these 45 years later, when seemingly I have more responsibility and Swami's off the planet, what's the difference? What is the difference? Why do I think now that I'm any more responsible than I ever was? Be ye therefore as little children, for of such are the kingdom of heaven. Many, many times, especially recently, I've said to myself, what is the difference? Where did you ever begin to think that it was really your show? When you were 24, you knew it wasn't. Why, now that you're nearly 70, do you think it is? What has changed? The building has changed. We have a four-wheel drive truck at the meditation retreat. The roads here are all paved. We have this gorgeous building, but what has changed? We have to ask ourselves that every day. Why did Master say that? Why did Jesus say this? Be ye therefore like little children. Children are really stupid and mostly out of their minds. We don't really want to be like little children. They don't know anything. But they're free. They're free in their relationship to life. They just are free. Here we are. Let's see what we can do. There are two little girls for the first time here, or for the first time I've seen them in our Sunday school. They must belong to some of the people in the room today. Beautiful little girls, sitting a little nervously while the Sunday school teacher is laying everything out, but not too nervously. There's crayons, there's pictures. And all of a sudden they're picking up the crayons and they're drawing the pictures. And I thought to myself, just so free. There they are. They're a place they've never been before. Somebody offers them a crayon and a picture, and there's nothing in the world now but the crayon and the picture. Somebody offers us a multinational corporation to run. What is the difference? It's just the right size project for who we are. But have we ceased to be children of God? Have we ceased to be Master's children? Have we become anything so important that when we go to heaven, God is going to say, oh, there's the one who ran the big company like this. How likely is that? It's not so. All that ever matters, all that we ever experience, and that's the most important part of it, all we ever experience is the quality of our own consciousness. And everything in the world conspires to tell us, now you must take yourself seriously. Now you must have a long face. Now you must worry. And believe me, I worry. I begin to imagine somehow that if I don't do X, Y, or Z, something is going to happen. Oh, maybe something that God wants will happen. When did I become in charge? And I did become in charge somewhere along the way. But I don't think that was the right decision. I really don't think that's the right decision. Reading Autobiography of a Yogi, you have that return of Master to Sri Yukteswar in 1935. And you have it, Master tells it through the eyes of Richard Wright, who was his secretary, who was with him, because I think Master himself was too on another dimension, even to know where he was. But of course, Richard Wright had been Master's disciple, and he'd been around the world, and everywhere he went, Master was lauded and honored as, you know, the apex of the spiritual pyramid in the room. And all of a sudden, Master comes and throws himself at the feet of his guru. And Richard himself, it's like to just suddenly see how Master considered himself. And on several different occasions, in the sweetest possible way, Swamiji revealed how he sees himself. I remember toward the end of his life, he would become so humorous. He often said his own self-deprecation was not even always appropriate. But he said, but it's fun. And after he gave a satsang once at Ananda Village, while he still had his microphone on, and it was still on, and he sort of stepped off the dais, and he was heading away, and Jyotish and Devi, who were driving, were with him, and Swami just says jovially, well, time to put the nut back in its shell. Just talking about himself like that. And, you know, in the early years, Swamiji was extremely, it was very, very informal. Devi talks about coming on July 4th in 1969. I think she might have told that story here. And this man in Bermuda shorts and this Hawaiian shirt comes up and exclaims, oh, we're having mashed potatoes for dinner. And then he goes eagerly in for mashed potatoes. Later she finds out it's Swami Kriyananda. Bharat, I think it was Bharat, the first time he came to Ananda, was hitchhiking down the road, and this, Swami wore Hawaiian shirts in the summer. This man in a Hawaiian shirt pulls over in this little VW bug and puts Bharat in the car and takes him up to Ananda. Later he finds out it was Swami Kriyananda who had picked him up. But Swami himself never made a point, and never, as he said, seemed very important. He just didn't. It wasn't his nature to do so. But as the years passed and many aspects of Ananda changed, you know, people started standing up when Swami came into the room, and many other things happened. And I remember Swami saying, he said, I feel the myth of Swami Kriyananda, he said, swirling around me. He said, but inside of it, I'm just the same old guy, just like that. And actually, his own concept of himself always was he was just Master's little boy. And in many ways, he was very fortunate because he was so young when he met Master, and really he was so young when Master died. He wasn't even 25. 25 is a full mature age. I remember myself, and I was fully present. But nonetheless, there was a lot of lifetime that Swami had in which he really understood what it meant to be a disciple and really understood what he'd had in Master. But he'd acted out his whole life with his guru in a very short period of time at the earliest stage, when he was very young. And in a very real sense, I think it was a great blessing, because he always saw himself in relationship to his guru as a young boy. Now, of course, that was also just his inner attitude. That was simply his inner attitude, because no matter how much passes through you, in fact, even it works exactly the opposite from the way it looks to people. The more passes through you, the more everyone else thinks, whoa, look at all that this person does. Look at who they are. But the more it's happening to you, the more you realize it's just passing through me. It has nothing to do with me. I remember how often Swamiji would just sort of give up trying to explain it. People just wanted to praise him and wanted to talk about how great he was, and he would just say quietly, God is the doer. It's what Master wanted. All I ever tried to do was serve Master. So easy, so relaxed, so free. When Swami Kriyananda met Swami Chidananda, not for the first time, but they met together in Rishikesh, and a whole group of us were with him. Swami Chidananda was a foremost disciple of Swami Shivananda, and he was the president of the Divine Life Society, which still is a huge worldwide organization. Shivananda was a great master. And Chidananda had this huge position, and Swami Kriyananda had this huge position, and all of Chidananda's devotees were hovering around, and all of Swami Kriyananda's devotees, we were all hovering around. There was this whole sort of scene, and the two men sit down on a little bench together, and Chidananda looks at Swami and he says, "And how is Ananda Cooperative Village?" And Swami Kriyananda says, "Fine." And then Swami Kriyananda says to Chidananda, "And how is the Divine Life Society?" And Chidananda says, "Fine," like that. And then they just looked into each other's eyes, and this deep belly laugh started. Ha, 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 ha. And they just laughed like that. And later I actually asked Swamiji if what I saw was what really happened. It was they looked at each other and said, "We know who we are, don't we?" There's all of this that just swirls around us. The myth of Swami Kriyananda, the myth of Swami Chidananda swirls around us. But I am my master's little boy, and so am I. And that's all that counts. That's what it is. That's what we need. That's what it is to be a disciple and to have a master. Is to have the dearest mother and the dearest father and have the freedom to be a child forever in Jesus' way. Be ye therefore like little children, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. That's what a guru gives to us, that perfect freedom.